I love a good monster story, and like many of you, I have desires to write my own books and short stories featuring the most terrifying monsters I can think of. But writing a truly frightening monster can be harder than you might think, and a big part of that has to do with the fact that fears are subjective. What scares one person might not scare another. For example, some people are deathly afraid of snakes.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm not. I happen to love snakes. And I know enough about them that the idea of being thrown into a pit of them wouldn't necessarily frighten me. I'd be concerned about getting bit if they were venomous, but that's just common sense. Fun fact for you, a lot of the so-called snakes in the first Indiana Jones movie aren't snakes at all. They're legless lizards, and none of the actual snakes are asps, as the movie claims.
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
Too bad Indy didn't know more about snakes, or he would have realized that the cobra was the only one he actually had to worry about. Okay, sorry, back on track. So, how do you frighten your audience if you can't rely on fears being universal? Well, for starters, I would set scaring the audience to one side, at least at first, and focus on scaring your characters. The reason snakes pop up so often in the Indiana Jones franchise is not because they're the only frightening or dangerous creatures out there, but because Indy himself is afraid of them. And since we care about him as a character, his distress is going to rub off on us, regardless of whether or not we're afraid of snakes ourselves. But if you're as twisted as I am, you don't just want your audience distressed. You want them terrified. We're talking full-blown, teeth-chattering, knees-knocking together terrified. That means only one thing: monsters. Big, bad, keep you up at night style monsters. So let's talk about what makes a monster truly terrifying, and we'll start by looking at some of the greats: vampires, werewolves, zombies, and ghosts. All of these have something in common, which is this: they're neither one thing nor the other. I'll explain what I mean by that. We, as humans, like to divide things into nice, neat little categories. The world is a complex place, and we need to simplify it as much as we can. That's why instead of just cramming every living thing on the planet under the same umbrella, we create groupings. Plants, animals, trees, bushes, humans, dogs, etc. It becomes a neat little filing system in our brains. We're used to it, and we're comfortable with it. So when something comes along that breaks down the barriers between these categories, it can be unsettling. When two categories merge with no earthly explanation, it's frightening. Think about it. Ghosts, vampires, and zombies are neither living nor dead. Werewolves are neither man nor beast. Our brains can't comprehend that, and that's what's scary. A truly terrifying monster shouldn't just threaten your characters physically. It should threaten everything they thought they knew about the world around them. This is why in some horror stories, just catching a glimpse of the monster has been known to actually drive a character mad. After I realized this, it became clear to me why I've always been so critical of werewolf designs in movies and TV. A lot of the time they either end up looking like very hairy men or just larger than average wolves, because it makes the special effects department's lives easier. And I get that, I do. But those designs have always fallen flat for me, because hairy men and large wolves are both very natural creations. There's no mystery behind them. However, if you combine the two and give me a creature with pointed ears, a snout, and a tail that also walks on two legs and has opposable thumbs, I know nothing like that exists in nature, and my brain shorts out trying to make sense of it. This isn't to say that you can't make more grounded creatures frightening, though. Take the shark in Jaws, for example. That's a great white shark. Yes, those are apex predators that can potentially pose a risk to humans, but there's nothing unnatural or magical about that. The food chain exists all across the globe. But the shark in Jaws still manages to merge between man and beast, not by what it is, but in how it behaves. Because even though it looks like a large shark, it acts more like a human serial killer, picking off its victims one by one and sometimes not even eating them, just leaving them behind. The same goes for the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. They're far from the largest dinosaurs on the island, but they are the most terrifying because they're animals that exhibit human traits, like the ability to strategize and open doors.
Clever girl.
The same can be true for human monsters like Hannibal Lecter. While he might not be a supernatural being, he is still capable of feats beyond what the average person would consider possible. Eating human flesh, for one thing.
Well, next time, bring your wife. I'd love to have you both for dinner.
He's also able to devise brilliant escape plans that most of us wouldn't be capable of. And that's just sticking to the movies. In the books, he is actually given some more monstrous attributes, namely maroon eyes and 6 fingers on his left hand. The books are so good, you guys. Go read them. Of course, there are countless characters across media that fall into the realm of being not quite one thing and not quite the other who would not be considered monsters. Any number of superheroes fit this bill. The same goes for a handful of Disney princesses and Star Wars characters. None of these would be considered monsters by their audiences, but they do perhaps walk the line more closely than we would care to admit. Some of the media they appear in even acknowledges this. After all, Elsa was hunted as a monster for a good chunk of her first movie. And there's a reason why so many superhero alternate timelines and dimensions explore what could happen if the heroes decided to use their powers for evil instead of good. But ultimately, we will always end up coming back to the heroes we know and love. So what actually separates characters like Elsa, or Superman, or Chewbacca apart from the monsters we see in horror movies? Their morality is clearly a big part of it, but I would argue that how the other characters react to them is actually more important. This ties back to what I was saying before about Indy and the snakes. How a character reacts to something is going to dictate how the audience reacts to it. Chewbacca, for example, could have easily been written as some sort of monster in Star Wars. And while he can be intimidating, none of the characters ever treat him like he's some unnatural creature. He's just another fantastical being in a universe full of them. And this is a big part of what separates fantasy from horror. Even the most dangerous creatures in fantasy aren't framed as a violation of the natural world. In a horror story, they would be. In conclusion, if you really want to write monsters that will terrify your audience, first you need to create some characters. Preferably characters who the audience will like and want to root for. Learn what those characters are afraid of and what their view of the world is. Then create a monster that will shatter it. And for that, I invite you to get as creative as you want. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe to my channel. A lot of the information I shared here I learned by reading the book The Philosophy of Horror by Noel Carroll. It's a pretty long, wordy book, and I'll be honest, at times it was a bit of a slog to get through, but the information presented definitely made it worth it. So if you're someone who's dedicated to learning how to write great horror, I do recommend picking up a copy. I'm going to wrap things up there for the day. Please share your thoughts in the comments down below, and tell me what monster kept you up at night the first time you read about or watched on screen. For me, it would have to be the Beast from Over the Garden Wall. That guy checks a lot of fear boxes for me. I won't go into spoilers here, but any monster that hangs around the woods at night, following you and singing without being asked is not one I want to run into. Alright, stay brilliant everybody. I'll see you in the next one.